In the 1980s, a film came out called Dune, and this is a scene from Dune just to set up the effect. And then I'm going to use this effect to demonstrate how you would use masking and tracking of the mask to try and get an effect and then have it move generally with the subject that you're trying to mask. So the scene is somewhere in the middle, and it shows Paul Atreides, who is new to the planet Dune, and a love interest. Sean Penn plays character Chani. And you see the Chani and all the other Fremen who have been eating spice. I know this is very nerdy. Their eyes are blue. And I'm going to use this idea as a way to do a test. And basically, you see a couple of problems there. One is if you draw in the blue eyes, which is how they did it, you have to move those eyes every time the frame moves. And I was able to get something like that to work in this following clip, and it was at least a couple of seconds where there's motion and the tracking tends to follow that motion. But I'm going to show you how that all came together and why how I did the masking using Adobe Premiere Pro, how I did the tracking, and then where some of the limitations of the software came into play when I was tracking the moving eyes, and you'll see all of that in a little bit. So here we have kind of three-step setup to show you kind of how this works. And the first setup is you have to have an effect, and the effect should have these symbols, and that's basically the symbol that you're going to use to create the mask. There are many visual effects that you can use. I chose Lumetri Color because of what I'm trying to accomplish here. So to set it up, I set up the screen to be what I wanted it to look like, and I settled on a blue, and I kind of like the way that that looks. When you choose a mask, I'm going to just do a real quick example here. You have three tools. You can draw freely, you can do a square, or you could do an ellipse. So I'm just going to show you how the drawing tool works. And basically when you're creating the mask with that tool, you're creating points that are going to extract out the effect so that it only applies within the mask, or you can reverse that. So I'm going to go ahead and close this up and just show you really quickly how that might look if I decided to invert it. And so again, the mask is just a drawing that you use. So I'm going to go on to the mask here that was created, and I want to show you real quickly how this plays out with one mask just on one eye. And again, the frames are moving and the mask is doing a decent job of tracking. And I wanted to show you how it looked, or how we did that, how I did that. Okay, so we're going to zoom in a little bit closer, and we're going to apply an ellipse mask to the eye. And basically what I'm trying to show in this is that what you have is one mask here, but when you create another one, you're creating a second mask. So that goes there, and you'll see mask 2. And it's basically the same effect, and you've got some really simple tools to get that mask to match as best you can. And again, none of this is perfect, but it's good enough to get started. Good enough for us to try. And again, if you start looking frame by frame, you will see that there are mistakes, even in this one. But I think that's a pretty good match. And so what you're saying is this is where I want the mask to be on this oval. But you know, if you had to track and move the mask manually for every single frame, it would be difficult. This is where they've given you a tool here in the mask tool, as well as a feather. I feathered it just to kind of blend it in a little bit so it wasn't a harsh line. And this tool right here, there's 3 different tracking methods. I use position, scale, and rotation, but there's other ways you could do it depending on if the shape doesn't change. You probably want to do position. If it changes and moves, you want to do that. But if there's a lot of movement happening, this is your best bet of having the match follow the path. And it's pretty straightforward. What you see here in mask 1 are all these keyframes, and the keyframes are what basically it processes it and figures it out by itself. So if I apply the mask here and say track, then it takes that mask and it processes it and does the best it can to follow that shape as the camera is moving and as the subject is moving. So the mask should follow along. And you should see keyframes that follow along with that mask once you've done the tracking. So you're drawing in the mask, you're choosing the tool, and then you're hitting this button, which will allow you to track. And it takes a long time. So I wouldn't do this on an entire film, but it's definitely something you could use occasionally. And already you can see in this that there's some misses right there, that it didn't perfectly track. But if we go back, I think you'll see that, especially earlier on, that the tracking is more true. This eye is following, and again, every single keyframe is a representation of when Adobe had to move the track to make sure that it followed. And even though that's lagging behind, the tracking essentially works pretty well for most of the scene. put it all together, and this is essentially what the effect will look like if you see that the camera's moving. And again, you see some little mistakes towards the end, but I would say that the track was true right to about here, and then there were some variations that it just wasn't able to keep up with. If you were doing this kind of work for real, you would spend time correcting every single frame. But the tracking works really well depending on how easily the object's identifiable by Adobe. Anyway, that's how it works. That's how it's done.